Welcome Wargamers, my name is Doug with 2+ Tough, and in today's video we're going to be doing a deep dive review of the Spires Warband box from Para-bellum, designed to get new players into playing this specific faction, which is of course the Spires. So if you've never joined me for one of my starter set reviews for other games, essentially what I do is I take a look at the actual contents of the box. We're going to look at the actual unit entries, kind of put together, give you a vague sense of how this set could play, talk about the overall value in terms of like the actual dollar amount, and then to have a discussion at the end about whether or not this is a great way to start playing this faction. I do really quickly want to throw a shout out there. I do have an affiliate link that will save you 10%, so if this or any of the other Warband sets really interest you, you can check out the link in the description down below. It really does help me as a content creator support the channel, but of course it does save you some money. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the Spires Warband box. Included in this set, you will get a unit of 12 Marksman clones, 12 Force-grown drones, a dual kit that can be built as 12 Vanguard clones or Vanguard clone infiltrators. We'll talk about both of those entries in a little bit. You also get 2 heroes, the high clone executor and the Biomancer. And last but not least, I want to talk about the fact that it includes 2 rule books. And I wanted to touch on that because Conquest is an interesting system that it's supported by 2 different game engines. There's The Last Argument of Kings, which is the mass battle army game, and then there's the other one which is called First Blood, which is more of a skirmish format. You actually get rule sets for both, meaning that you now have everything you need to start playing either game system. We're going to kick it off with a little bit of a bird's eye view before we start digging into the individual units. At first glance, I think it's a wonderful set. I think there's 5 heroes in the entire Spires faction. This comes with 2 of the most commonly taken ones. The High Clone Executor is a great martial combat kind of guy, whereas the Biomancer is more the magic side of things. The Spire magic works a little bit different than other factions, but you get both their strengths, like the trickiness of the Biomancer and the straightforward military might of the Executor. And something that has to kind of be brought up is that the Spires are unique in that they have fantastic ways of letting crappy small units swing way above their weight class. By that I mean they can take a unit of drones, which are mostly just chaff units, we'll talk about them a little bit, but they can actually do incredible amounts of damage at the cost of hurting themselves. And so it is very interesting. They have this cool dynamic. So even if you're looking at their profiles and you're like, that's not very impressive, buckle in, there's some cool ways to really get a lot out of them. The actual clone units, so the Marksman and the dual kit of the infiltrators, you can't really make a wrong choice. You know, we'll talk about them both in a minute, but I'm just going to say up front at the start of this review, there's no wrong choices here. You're going to want multiples of either of them. All in all, I think it's a great start to the faction. It's a nice, flood of bodies. One thing it kind of lacks is some of the big, cool centerpiece models like the Brutes or the Abomination. Those kinds of things are available from the 2-player starter set, which is also a fantastic monetary deal. But again, I'm going to kind of punt that conversation about which one is a better start to Spires towards the end. So with that out of the way, let's go check out the entries inside their army list and explore what units you get. And the first unit we're going to look at today are the Force-grown drones. We're starting from the weakest and working our way up. Now, Force-grown drones, if you don't know, it's a minimum of 3 stands with 4 models per stand. So there's 12 dudes in the unit. They are an infantry type, which means that honestly just doesn't mean a whole lot for them right now, but their class is light, meaning that they cannot claim objectives. However, they can contest them if the enemy is there. They have a movement of 5. It's very, very simple, very straightforward. Their volley doesn't matter. They don't have any kind of weapons. The clash value of 1 is sad. These are sad panda fighters. Attacks 1 each, 1 wound each, resolve of 1, defense 1, and evasion 0. What that all goes into telling you is that these guys are made to die with a point value to match. So the special rules here actually shine a little bit of light into what they're fantastic at, which is shield. If you don't know, you get +1 to your defense if the attacks come from your front arc. They literally are toting giant shields. This is only applicable to volley actions and class actions. If there's other effects and that kind of stuff, it wouldn't really affect that. The second rule they have is support, meaning that if they have ranks that are behind and not directly in combat, they'll contribute more to each fight. So, because they're so cheap, you could have large regiments of these guys, and then because of the support rule, All the guys way in the back can still contribute in a more meaningful way, meaning they can just have a bucket of dice, so to speak, to make up for that terrible clash value of 1. They don't come with any kind of built-in draw event, and they really have just a few options when it comes to upgrades, and we are going to cover those. For each additional stand, you're looking at 25 points, but there are 2 really standout options for upgrades. They only have 2 options, but the first one is the Catabolic node, which a few units here can take, and we're going to talk about that now. The Catabolic node, he's a really gross looking guy, and the idea here is, what if we basically made a biobomb weapon, right? Here's how it reads. The first time the regiment uses a clash action, so when they fight in combat, you roll 2d6. The biobomb that he is inflicts that number of hits on one enemy regiment in contact with its regiment, so somebody you're in combat with. It also inflicts a number of hits on its own regiment equal to the highest score of the individual d6s rolled. Hits are always treated as if they've been inflicted from the front, so that matters for the purposes of shield and that kind of thing. Then remove the Catabolic node model as a casualty and replace it with a spare rank and file model. So in essence, you can attach a small, almost like a suicide bomber, to this unit. So if they are a minimum sized unit with one of those things, you can just have them rush up into a combat you know they're going to lose and try and gamble for throwing a few more wounds upon the enemy than they normally would have been able to inflict. Of course, you will be taking some of that back if you roll, say, a 1 and a 6. Your opponent takes 7 hits and you will take 6, because 6 is the highest number on those 2 dice. So just kind of keep that in mind. It could be really cool. Best case scenario, I guess, you would probably roll, I don't know what I want to roll, to be honest with you. It's really great for small units that are intended to die. At the end of the day, that's what it is. The second upgrade that they can take is the Pheromonic node. Now, this is interesting to kind of point out here, is that in Conquest, standard bearer and leaders are ubiquitous across every faction. They all do the exact same thing. Here's a quick shot from the core rules. Regiment with a leader halves the number of wounds it suffers when making a fighting reform, which is just an action you can do to try and kind of change direction or reform your ranks mid-battle. In addition, the presence of a leader allows the regiment to reroll a single failed hit roll during volley or clash action. So you get a little bit of a reroll adage there. And the standard bearer is a regiment with a standard bearer may reroll failed charges and adds 1 to its march distance, not the march characteristic, on the second march action it performs. So if you do a move, you get a little boost to speed in addition to the leader thing. Now, for most factions, these are separate upgrades. You buy a leader, you buy a standard bearer. When it comes to the Spires, they are a little bit different in that their options are combined into one model. That might sound like a good thing, but the truth is you honestly would be paying points for things that you sometimes won't use. So it's not like an auto includer in every situation. For this one, if you wanted to have a big unit run up and just, kind of be a wall or a buffer to your enemy, having the standard bearer there, the Pheromonic node who gives you the standard bearer rules, is really great, but you're not going to be using or making much use of the leader capability. So just kind of think about that. It's point-wise, it's fine. It's kind of on par with some of the other factions depending on what unit it is, but that's an option there if you want it. Again, this is one of those things like the real value of the forest grown drones is their cheapness and the shield ability. Just because they can be a little bit better of a curb stomp than other units can. So depending on how much you want to invest in them, they can do little bits of different roles. Next up are the Marksman clones. I actually just got another set of these guys and I like them quite a bit. So they're an infantry type. Their class is medium, so they can now hold down objectives and things like that. They also have a movement of 5, a volley of 2, which means you're going to be, when you roll dice, hitting on 1s and 2s, because Conquest goes the other way with dice, so it would be a 2 and less would be a hit. Clash value of 1, you don't want these guys in combat. Marksman should say everything. They're an archer unit. Attacks 1, wounds 1, resolve 2, so a little bit better there, and 1 defense with 0 evasion. Special rules are barrage 2, meaning you get to shoot 2 shots each dude, and at 28-inch range, arcing fire. So There's a lot to take in there. They don't have a ton of options and that kind of stuff. As you can see, like I mentioned before, they have the option to take standard bearers and leaders separately. Some units do, some units don't. This is one that does. As far as their job, they are there to be a ranged attack unit. That's it. Nothing else. That makes it very simple to talk about them. Each model will get 2 shots when they fire, so Barrage 2 is fantastic. 28 inches is a fantastic range. Now keep in mind, in Conquest, if you're shooting over half the distance, you have the number of shots that land. So let's say you have 12 guys in the unit. If you are within half range, you'll shoot 24 shots. If you're outside of that, but within 28, you can shoot 12. So it kind of gives you a sense of how that works. Now, arcing fire is a very interesting special rule that's attached to their barrage effect. What that means is they don't actually need to have line of sight to shoot at their enemy. If any unit in the faction, in your army, has line of sight and they're within range, the Marksman clones can shoot like over any obstacle or over any wall or combatant that they see and get them that way. It makes them extremely deadly. It helps you kind of like hide these guys maybe behind some terrain or behind a larger unit than them to kind of keep them hidden away. But it does come at the cost of like, you probably won't get your full complements of shots when you do that. However, a volley of 2 is not bad, and there are ways to buff that with other events and things like that. Beyond this, there's not a ton to talk about it with the unit. You know, it's 3 stands, 4 infantry models, pretty classic the way it's set up. And if you want to add more stands, it's 55 points. Next, we're going to talk about the Vanguard clones. This is one of the 2 options that you can get with a multi-kit to make Vanguard clone infiltrators as well. But we're going to stick with these guys for right now. And I just want to say, as a spoiler, there's no wrong choice. Just go with whatever you think sounds cool. For the Vanguard clones, this is your melee variant. They're infantry, class type medium, so they can cap objectives. They have a movement value of 6, a volley of 2, which doesn't really matter for them, clash of 2, which is great compared to your force-grown drones, 2 attacks each, 1 wound, resolve 3, defense 2, and evade 2. Now, for those of you who are not familiar to Conquest, evade is a very, very cool rule. So essentially, your defense score can be modified. If somebody has like cleave, it's basically like armor piercing, and it brings down their defense just a bit. But nothing in the game as of right now affects evade, so you just take whichever save is better. So what that means is, no matter what they're going up against, you will always have a save on a 1 or 2, which is great. And for special rules, they all come with the shield special rule. Effectively, if they take on an enemy in their front rank or get shot from the front, they are defense 3. As for a draw event, they do not have one. That's totally fine. They come, again, 3 stands, 4 dudes each. It's very typical for the infantry stands. You can buy an additional stand for 55 points. And again, they have the option of having the standard bearer and the leader being separate options. Now we're going to get into some attachments, some hero attachments that we haven't explored yet, but I'm very excited to show you. Because instead of just having like the Catabolic node like the drones had, these guys have 2 different options that are incredible. There's the Ward Preceptor and the Assault Preceptor. Let's talk about those. So we're back on this page. This is the page in their command models thing that just kind of shows you the unique unit add-ons that you can put into a regiment in your faction. The Assault Preceptor, while the Assault Preceptor is alive, the regiment has the Fury Draw event. What that means is when you flip this command card and it is time for your Vanguard clones, I got myself totally tongue-tied there. When you flip that card, the Fury event kicks in. So what is Fury? When determining the number of attacks that a regiment performs, add 1 attack to each engaged stand until the end of that turn. So if you rush up and you get these guys in combat, when you draw their command card for them to activate, everybody who's engaged, so it doesn't act like support, anyone who's out of combat doesn't get any benefits, but if you are one of the stands who is fighting, +1 attack. That is truly awesome on a unit that already has 2. Now, keep in mind, because it's a draw event, if there are things that make this unit fight or take a clash action before they've actually drawn their command card, it's very rare. I mean, there's not a lot of situations that would happen, but it is possible that they don't get that benefit. However, for the normal activations, if I activate my unit, boom, you flip their card, draw event kicks in. That's great. And the second is the Ward Preceptor. While the Ward Preceptor is alive, the regiment has the Bastion draw event. And that is cool, and Bastion works like this. Until the end of the turn, the stand, or stands within the regiment, have +1 defense. So if we go back to our Vanguard clone entry and we're looking at, we can only have one of those two options presented. We can either make them a very aggressive melee variant by giving them the Ward Preceptor, effectively making them 3 attacks each on 12 models. If you rush these guys head in, you can do some really nasty things. You could always also take a leader, because that's a different option, which will give you 1 reroll to a hit roll, anything like that. Now, the flip side is you could make them very, very defensive. The Ward Preceptor, giving them +1 defense, when their draw event kicks in, would give them defense 3, but because they have shield, they would be defense 4 from the front, which is terrific. And all of that is underpinned by the fact that they still have evasion 2. So even if there's some mega thing that can pierce the thickest of armor, they will always have some defensive countermeasure. Vanguard clones are fantastic. These are kind of the slightly, I'm going to say they're probably the more elite infantry that the Spires have access to right now. There are bigger, tougher things, but these guys are really, really great. And lastly are the Vanguard clone infiltrators, the other option that you can build from that same kit. A lot of their stats are exactly the same. I'm just going to breeze through them very quickly. They are an infantry. They are light, though, so they do not count for capping objectives. They have a movement of 6, volley of 2, clash of 2, attacks 2, 1 wound each, resolve 3, defense 1, evade 2. A lot of that's the exact same with some minor modifications to the defense. Now, their special rules are where they really get intense, and for the purposes of brand new players who don't want to be bogged down with way too much stuff to remember, I will say the Vanguard clones, like the melee variant, is much more straightforward and easier to buff. These guys, they get a little bit cumbersome when it comes to the universal special rules. So the first one is Fluid Formation. A regiment where all non-character stands have this rule, so obviously this entire thing, can take an extra reform action. This action must be used first or last. A regiment with the Fluid Formation special rule has 360 degrees line of sight, which is important. The reason that's important is that means you have a unit that, I'm just going to spoil the next special rules we talk about, which is Barrage. So they are bow-wielding, very light, ranged fighters. They can, at the beginning or at the end, do a free reform action, change direction, pivot, whatever they need to do to get themselves set up, either for the next round or the round that they're currently in. That is a wonderful, wonderful special rule. Now, their second rule, again, keeping with the win streak, is called Vanguard. And the way that Vanguard works is that upon activation, this regiment arrives as reinforcements, meaning in Conquest, your units all have to walk onto the board. And if it takes at least a single march action, it may take a single additional free march action, provided no enemies were within 8 inches when it comes onto the battlefield. In English, if you walk onto the battlefield and there's no enemies around, you get a free movement, which allows you to catapult these guys and project threat with their bows further up the board. Now, they do also have Barrage 2, like we said. They are a ranged unit, so their range is only 18 inches, so a little bit closer, actually much closer than the Marksman clones, but these guys have a lot more movement, tricks and that kind of stuff, so they can get real up there and in your face. Again, what that means is you're going to be taking 1 shot if they're within 9 to 18 inches. If they're 0 to 9 inches away, or I should say 1 to 9 inches away, you'll be doing the full barrage of 2 shots. The special rules on those shots are Snap Fire. If a regiment makes only 1 march action, all stands with this special rule may make a volley action as soon as that march is concluded as part of the same action. A Snapfire volley suffers -1 penalty to the firer's volley characteristic. It does not count as a volley action, allowing a regiment to perform another action as normal. That's a lot of gibberish. Let me break that down. If you do at least only 1 move action during your turn, at the end of it, you can shoot. But because it's linked into the movement action and not part of an actual volley, you can move, shoot, and then take a volley action and shoot again. Now, the caveat being that free one you get from Snapfire, it is at a reduced volley score, so it's volley of 1, which means they're really, really crappy shots, but it just weight of dice allows you to move, be aggressive, move, shoot, shoot. And the last special rule is Deadly Shot. And again, this is why I'm saying it gets a little bit cumbersome when you start stacking all these rules. So for Deadly Shot is when models with more than 1 wound fail a defense roll against ranged attacks from a unit with this special rule, they must add 2 wounds to the wound pool rather than 1. So in English terms, if any time a unit that has more than 1 wound natively, which is basically just anything that's not an infantry model, takes a wound, they actually take 2 damage for that shot for every failed save. So that allows them to basically swing much higher against their weight class, right? They can reasonably shoot down large targets. And of course they have, you can get additional stands, or you can do a leader option, which would allow you to reroll 1 hit roll every time you take a volley or clash action. You don't want them in melee combat. If you really think that 1 reroll is worth the 10 points, it's totally up to you. For me personally, having these guys just kind of operate independently, I think is sort of the win. So those are all the infantry units that you get in the game, and now we're going to transition to talking about the heroes. Now I'm going to be very clear, talking about heroes in Conquest is a bit difficult because there are so many options available to you, you can really kind of make them whatever you want them to be. That being said, what I'm going to cover in this video is just the supremacy abilities they have access to, so they'll very quickly show you what they're really good at. And then I'll kind of pick out like 1 or 2 different ways of customizing them to kind of give you at least an idea of where you can go with them. So kicking off with the supremacy abilities, essentially, if you choose particular heroes to be your warlord, your general of your army, once per game you can activate a supremacy ability in the supremacy phase, and will be good, and you'll basically get that for the entire turn. So the 2 heroes that we get in this box are the Biomancer and the High Clone Executor, our top 2 options right here. For the Biomancer, if he is your army's warlord, at the start of whatever round you want to use it, for the remainder of the turn, all infantry stands have +1 attack, and the Decay 3 draw event, which I'll explain in a bit. All cavalry and brute stands have +2 attacks in the Decay 4, and all monsters, which right now is just your abomination, the big guy, have +4 attacks and gain Decay 6. So let me just read Decay in the way that works, because everything else is very straightforward stats and things like that. Roll a number of dice equal to the draw event's attribute, so in this case, Decay 3, Decay 4, Decay 6, whatever it is, for each stand in the regiment with this special rule. So if it's a 3-stand thing of force-grown drones, they're going to be rolling 9 dice. Decay 3 on 3 stands, 9 dice. For each roll of a 5 or 6, the unit suffers a wound. However, casualties suffered from decay do not cause morale tests. If a stand has several types of decay, you put them all in together in 1 dice pool. So if they have Decay 3 from one thing and Decay 2 from another, you're just rolling 5 dice. So essentially, kind of going back to our main point, what this allows the Biomancer to do is for 1 turn, your entire army gets to swing way above their weight class at the cost of burning their candle at both ends. So giving +1 attack to everybody, as well as, that stacks with the Fury Draw event that the clones can get that we talked about before with the Ward Preceptor, the Assault Preceptor, that's what I meant. But just kind of keep that in mind. So he has a way of, actually multiple ways. This is just one, but there are other spells and abilities he can do that will add to this. But again, 1 turn, everybody gets way good in combat at the cost of some life. The next one is the High Clone Executor. He has Coordinated Assault. This turn, you resolve the top 3 cards of your command stack as one quote-unquote go. Draw 3 cards, resolving the actions for each in turn before your opponent draws their next command card. These activations cannot draw anything. Basically, you can't make this happen multiple times. Why this is important is because essentially, when your High Clone Executor goes, basically you get to rush immediately 3 activations before your opponent gets to go. Now keep in mind, your opponent still gets to go. Like if you just rush yourself forward, you can get all your guys deleted because you've just put yourself out there for your opponent. But if you use it intelligently in terms of like, you know, moving archers to the right position or, you know, kind of doing clashes with the right units, it can be devastating. And this is also great because some effects like Bastion, if you're using the Ward Preceptor unit attachment, the +1 defense that he gives doesn't kick in until their unit activates. So you could do the High Clone Executor, start that unit up as one of your 3, and all of a sudden, boom, for the rest of the round, they have Bastion when they need it, before the enemy ever gets a chance to go. But now we're going to talk about the Biomancer specifically. That was a talk about the leaders in general, about choosing the right warlord, but let's talk about the actual units themselves. So the Biomancer, infantry, he's light, he has a movement of 6, volley of 2, clash of 2, attacks 2, wound. He has 4 wounds, which is not a whole lot for these dudes. Resolve 4, so when you're doing resolve test, whatever unit he's in, we'll use his resolve. Defense 1 and evasion 2. Now what's interesting is that he comes with a built-in draw event. Whenever he activates, this kicks off no matter what, or if you have multiple draw events, you can choose one. The one he comes with base, is called Biotic Renewal. Roll a d6, the regiment, meaning whatever he's a part of, heals a number of wounds equal to the result. Then, roll a d6 for each other friendly regiment within 8 inches of the active character stand, meaning him. That regiment heals a number of wounds equal to half the result, rounding down. If the regiments affected do not have the infantry type, reduce the healing to D3 and have that. What that means in layman terms, he gives a D6 healing to his unit and then does a little bit of healing to anything around him. It works best for infantry, but he can put a wound or 2 back on something like a big brute monster. Now what's interesting is that even though you hear the term Biomancer, you might think that he is a wizard, and Biomancies work very different than wizards in this game. Essentially, Biomancies are draw events. You can buy them, and they basically give you more options when you come to that guy's turn. We'll talk about a few of them that I think are really cool, but essentially, there's no spell casting with these guys. You just get more options when your Biomancer activates. And while that might seem strange that, you know, the guy who sounds like a wizard isn't actually a wizard, it works to your favor because, one, nobody can stop a draw event, right? You can't get shut down. There's no way to deflect or unbind magic, you know, of the Biomancies. They will happen if you want them to, and that is a really awesome guarantee of power. One thing I skipped here was mutations. Mutations are just like artifacts. You can just pick one for each of these heroes, and it just gives them a little buff. As far as the Biomancies go, I think some of the cooler ones to look out for. Let's go to that page. And we'll see, this is on the Biomancies part, the last page within the Spires rule set. They have some very interesting things, and this is why I say the draw events are so much more powerful than magic. So I'm just going to pick one, and you'll see exactly what I mean. We'll go with Catalytic Rupture, the first one. Draw your next command card, so the next unit to activate. If you wish, that unit, or regiment rather, suffers D6 wounds. If you do, all enemy regiments in contact with that one also suffer D6 wounds. That regiment then acts, and then this character takes its action. So kind of putting that in perspective, when you flip your Biomancer's card, this draw event kicks in, meaning you then flip the next card. So it's functionally letting you have 2 activations before your opponent gets to have 1. The Biomancer goes, draw event kicks in. The next unit comes. They take wounds, they hurt everyone around them, but then they get their activation. So they can then do combat and do damage, and then it goes back to your Biomancer, who can finish up whatever he needs to do. Maybe he can do a duel or something like that against an enemy hero. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. And then your opponent gets to go. A lot of these are in that same vein of letting you manipulate the order of activation for units. You're able to hurt your units to heal others. You're able to give special rules to your units and then let them act. Grand Virulence is a fantastic one. Draw your next command card. That regiment has the Deadly Blades or Deadly Shot. We reviewed that when we did the infiltrators thing. That's where you do like double damage to anything bigger than an infantry model. So if you need to swing above your weight class, boom, there you go. Here's a really gross one. Unstable Enhancement. Draw your next command card. Until the end of the turn, all stands in that regiment have +4 March, so speedy, +2 Clash, and +1 volley. The regiment then acts, but it has decay 3. Decay 4 if it's a brute, decay 6 if it's a monster. So this does stack with the supremacy ability, and so you could have one turn where you just absolutely vaporize your own unit, but at the cost of letting them smash your opponent so stinking hard. And if it's something on, say, like drones, where they're very cheap, they're not going to be hitting the moon and the stars, but they can do really well for one round. And then they die. But then again, remember, this guy has biotic renewal built in. He can heal troops. He can add add models back to stands and then add stands. So it's just a lot of that give and take. You're using wounds as your resource to allow you to swing harder. I'm not going to comment too much on the mutations. That's just really how you want to build your character out. But the last thing I want to talk about here are the Warband options. The retinue stuff, like I said, I'm going to do a whole dedicated video for retinues and masteries and how you can kind of craft a very specific hero to do very specific things. But I'm going to do that later. For the Warband options, here's all you need to know. Every hero can take 5 choices. Mainstays are things that they have access to as many as you want. He can take all the force-grown drones that he wants. Restricted means you can take them, but you have to have one mainstay choice in your warband to take each one of these. So basically you can have one abomination for every force-grown drone unit, because bound clones right here, their other mainstay option, aren't out quite yet. As of the time of recording, the incarnate sentinels are on their way out and the abomination already exists. So those are really his only options there. This guy wants to be in units of lots of cheap guys that he can manipulate and hurt and then, add wounds back to him and that kind of stuff. So that's really where he is. Honestly, him with a unit of force-grown drones is a threat because, frankly, he makes them very scary for a turn. So if you come at the Biomancer and you're not ready for the wallop that he could potentially throw back at you with just a bunch of crummy chaff units, be prepared for that. And then lastly is the High Clone Executor. Now this is a cool guy. Again, we already said if he's your general, he lets you activate 3 units before your opponent has a chance to go. That's awesome. He is an infantry. He is a medium type. Movement of 6, volley 3, which doesn't really matter for him. Clash of 3, which is great. 5 attacks, 4 wounds, 4 resolve, 2 defense, and 1 evade. He's a very competent fighter type guy. His special rules, he's a character, and he has Cleave 1. Cleave means that he reduces the defense value of anything he's punching. So he has a little bit of armor piercing. He does not, unlike the Biomancer's Biotic Renewal, have a built-in draw event. For his options, he can again take a single mutation, which is kind of like their artifacts or treasures. And he has a list of tactics, and they're all different, very common draw events. These are all very generic things, but you can add them to him to make them better at stuff. So for example, he can add Bastion for 30 points. Well, that's just like the Ward Preceptor. Now all of a sudden, whatever unit he's a part of has +1 defense. It doesn't stack with the Ward Preceptor, unfortunately, because they both use the tactic known as Bastion. You can't have the same effect twice, but it is very interesting. And I'll quickly run through the others here just because these are all generic core rules from the game and that are not listed on their actual sheet, so I'll just run through them quickly. Double time is you draw the next command card. If that command card is for the active character's regiment, i.e. the one that they're a part of, that regiment acts immediately. If it marches twice, it may make an additional march action. Once the regiment has completed the actions, the character then takes his or her action, and if the drawn command card is not the character's regiment, place it on the bottom of your command stack. So that's a long way of saying, hey, listen, always have your High Clone Executor right before the unit he's a part of. You flip it over, that double time draw event kicks in, you flip your next card, it's the unit that he's in, you get to move hella fast for a round, and that's about it. For 15 points, he can take Fire and Advance. Draw the next command card. If that command card is for the active character's regiment, it acts immediately. If the stand's regiment uses a volley action as its second action, it may make a third action, which must be a march, after the volley action is resolved. Once the regiment has completed its actions, the character then takes his action. Same deal as last time. If it's not the next card is not the regiment he's a part of, it goes to the bottom of the pile. This allows him to have a unit that can move, shoot, and then move away, which is great for kind of baiting or kiting your enemy. But it also gets very interesting when you talk about using it with the Marksman, because you can give them a lot more mobility, much like the infiltrator cousins that they have. And the last one we've talked about here, Fury, the same thing that the Assault Preceptor gives, where it's +1 attack for any stands that are in combat. So he's like a much more malleable version of the command models that we've talked about before, but I do like him because that supremacy ability once per game to let 3 units go, when you combine it with his abilities of Bastion and Double Time or, Fury, that kind of stuff, it gets really, really great. For his Warband options, he can of course take Force-Grown Drones. That's the basic dude. Absolutely, he can do Bound Clones and Vanguard Clones. This is honestly, truthfully, why I think Vanguard Clones would be a great choice for that kit. Again, there is no wrong one, but I think in terms of their ease of use, the way that they take buffs so well from units like this, you could have a Ward Preceptor, which would give them Bastion, and then have the High Clone Executor be the leader of the group, kind of tack him on, and he can give them Fury, and that'll all work together, and that's how you can buff these guys to the 9s. They just take buffs very, very well. And then for restricted, he can do Brute Drones, which are the big stompy monster guys you get in the 2-player core set, and Vanguard Clone Infiltrators. And the other options aren't out yet except for the Marksman clone. So he can do quite a bit. Vanguard Clone Infiltrators, I don't see him doing a lot with them. I think honestly the best buff he gives them is letting them go with 2 other units at the Supremacy event ability. And Marksman clones, I think he's a fairly good addition to if you want to use that double time. So let's take a step back now that we've kind of gone through all the individual units and talk about how does this set fit into the Spires army? What's the value of it and all that? Well, I'll say this, if you do get the rule books for both First Blood and Last Argument of Kings. If you go First Blood, you have not only a bunch of options, but some really fantastic ones as well. You have a lot of choices. You can build both options because you kind of do it on a stand-by-stand basis. So you can actually build Infiltrators and Vanguard clones. They're both great. You have an entire First Blood army. As for playing the Last Argument of Kings, I'll be honest, I do feel like the set is missing a bit because you don't get some of the bigger, stompier stuff. Like, you have ways to make units swing above their weight class, but you don't have a variety of types of units to do that with. So we saw in some of the Biomancies rules, it's like Decay 3 if it's infantry, Decay 4 if it's a brute, Decay 6 if it's a big monster. Those things exist, they're all in the 2-player starter set. The Brute Drones, which are these big stompy guys, and then there's the Abomination, which is probably one of the best monsters in the game. There are pros and cons to this set over the 2-player starter. What I'd say, honestly, the 2-player starter is just a great monetary value. So if you want that, you like the big stompy stuff, go with that one and just throw the 100 Kingdoms up on eBay or something like that. In favor of the Warband set here, this is a great set because it does a few things that the 2-player starter set doesn't. And mainly I think that is introducing you to what the Spire are all about. We went through just a few examples with the Biomancies, manipulating the order of cards and operations and that kind of stuff, being able to heal units and damage other ones. You'll be using the Decay event a lot, meaning you can hurt yourself to get better. Some of the options just let you put Decay on your enemies that you're engaged with. There's a lot of cool things there. You get to really explore what makes the Spire so unique. And then the High Clone Executor is just a wonderful hero to have. I think he makes a great first general choice. So there's a lot going for this set. I think in terms of model diversity, the 2-player starter set might win out. But in terms of teaching you the faction about what makes the Spires good, their strengths and weaknesses, this set wins in my opinion. Full stop, you're going to use the Biomancer and the High Clone Executor in most games. They are terrific hero choices. When you get away from those two, things get a little more niche, so you have to kind of really know the faction well. But those are 2 standout starting heroes. And the fact is, you get 3 units, so full regiments, Force-Grown Drones, whatever, infiltrator option you go with, and then also the Marksman clones. When you put those all together, you have a lot of units to play with and explore how the different draw events and things like that work. Basically, when I look at these kinds of sets, I'm looking at, does it teach new people the game? And then does it teach new people this faction? And to both, I would absolutely say yes. In a perfect world, you would either start here or with the 2-player set and then expand into the other. So like I started with the 2-player starter set and then got this afterwards. No regrets. I think it's a great way to expand, and vice versa. If you start with this, adding some of those big monsters and big stompies from the 2-player starter set is a wonderful idea. Now, the last little metric I have for kind of reviewing starter sets and that kind of stuff is to ask 2 very basic questions. Do the models that you get represent the faction? Like, you're not, you know, buying this because these things look cool and then you expand and then realize, oh my gosh, the rest of the faction looks totally different. And secondly, are you actually going to use those models? You know what I mean? Like, we've all had starter sets where once you get into the game, you realize, I actually don't use those guys a whole lot. Well, for the first one, I can honestly say if you like the look of the Biomancer and the High Clone Executor, Force-Grown Drones, that kind of stuff, you're going to love everything else in the Spire. Like, they all kind of have a very cohesive aesthetic. They look like what you see on the box. If you like the way the models are in this, you're going to love everything else that comes out for it. As for the second question, about whether or not you're actually going to use these models, I've said before, you will use the Biomancer and the High Clone Executor. Those are 2 of the best heroes in this faction. Beyond that, whatever version of the clones that you make, the infiltrators or the other one, Vanguard clones. I don't know why I keep forgetting they're just called Vanguard clones. I'm so sorry. You're going to be using either variants of those. You're probably going to want a few boxes to get both builds and have different numbers of units and fill them out, whatever you want to do. I think that's a wonderful place to start. Force-grown drones, for me, I'm just not a big chaff unit guy. Like, I like to have a lot of meaty things on the board, but players absolutely love them because they really can tie down entire flanks with just bodies having shield and support. And of course, if you do go the route of the Biomancer, you can make them swing above their weight class in exchange for some health. My point is, the overwhelming majority of the things in this box you're going to use no matter what playstyle you have, or you're aiming for. Even if you want to eventually lean into doing like big scary monster types like the Abomination and stuff, you'll still want Force-Grown Drones because you're gonna want to have some small chaff unit to fill out the basic parts of your list building, and that way they can kind of shield and act defensive around your big stompy stuff to make sure it gets into combat. The heroes, I've already gushed enough on them, and then the Marksmen are kind of the only ones that I'm not sure every build would use, but I do think that there's a lot of merit to them. So having them in your toolbox, in your arsenal, even if you don't go wild and you don't buy 3 more boxes of them, just having a unit that you can kind of look at and think about and explore, you know, how the ranged combat works. And usually Arcing Fire is kind of the crown jewel of their actual entry. I think that those are all really great things. But friends, those are just my thoughts. I think it's a wonderful box and a wonderful starting point. If you have thoughts about this, kind of doing pros and cons with this and the 2-player starter, leave in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your opinions. And again, if you are interested in this box, you can support me and the channel by using the link down below. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you sat through this entire video with me. Thank you so much, and let me know in the comments what of the Warband boxes do you want me to cover next. They have a lot of these kind of, you know, box sets, but I tried to pick the Warband boxes because they're not holiday bundles or special releases. They're going to be around for a long time, so that seemed like a stronger place to start. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.